Hey, rock stars. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars. My name is Lij Shaw, and this is the show that brings you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Rok Gulic, the
Yeah.
founder of OLLO Audio, a company that started with a simple yet ambitious question of how do you bring the immersive sound of a studio environment into a headphone experience. What
Mm.
began as a passion project in his father's garage, experimenting with tactile transducers and hand building prototypes, has grown into a global brand trusted by professional engineers. OLLO headphones are designed for durability, sustainability, and long term use with fully replaceable parts and a 5-year warranty. Join us on this special video interview with Rok to dive into his journey with the DIY experimentation and talking to us about creating these beautiful headphones and founding OLLO and just, what we need to know about working inside headphones and getting a great quality mix, great quality recordings, and just having a great listening experience. Also, a big shout out and a thank you to our mutual friend Mark Orsetti, who originally made our introduction. Rock, I've been waiting to say this.
Yeah.
Rock, are you ready to rock?
Yeah, I am. Let's go.
Dude, it's great to have you here on the show, man. Thanks so much for doing this podcast interview with us. Just being on doing a special video for our YouTube channel. It's great
Well,
to meet you.
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let me see. Why don't we begin a little bit at the beginning? Maybe we need to give us a quick backstory on who you are and who OLLO is. Particularly like how did you begin this process of designing and building headphones?
Well, it starts with having a family. So literally, I was having a band when I was like in my 20s, of course, like most of us, engineers, audio engineers.
And
Uh,
where are you,
and
by the way? You're not right here. You're not in Nashville. That's where I am.
no, I'm not in Nashville. I'm actually in Slovenia, which would be, um, I'm literally like an hour drive away from Venice in Italy. So
Oh
that's
wow.
to put me on the map. Yeah. So, yeah. To continue on, having kids made mixing in the evening impossible or at night. It also made impossible to go to a studio and mix records there. For my own band. So eventually, I had to try and find headphones to help me out, and I just didn't get anything that would translate, literally. So eventually, the idea came to like, can I just make a headphone for myself as a side project, not really, having any plans on starting a company. It was just like an engineering side hustle. Let's do something in the garage. And it's turned out pretty good from the get-go. So, a friend wanted a pair, and then another friend wanted a pair, and another friend. So essentially, I quit my day job and dived all the way into building OLLO to what it is today. And that's been a decade now.
That's wild. I mean, how do you even begin to build a headphone in a garage? I mean, it sounds so cool, but then when we think about it, like, what am I going to do? Find the smallest speakers I can find and just like strap them onto the side of my head? Like, what are some things? What are the earliest memories you have of trying to figure out how to build headphones?
Oh man, it's a pain because headphones have like a slightly different acoustical principles than speakers do. I mean, sure, it's the same, it's just physics, but it's in a tiny cabinet, so things are slightly different. So, whatever I've learned, from being a musician in different venues and stuff like that, just didn't directly apply to a headphone. So, I was struggling with that. And the main issue 10 years ago, truthfully, was to find a good speaker driver small enough that you can actually use as a headphone driver. You can get things from, or back then it was possible to get things from China, some shitty stuff usually,
Hmm.
or from
Hmm.
Amazon, same shitty stuff but just more
Yeah.
expensive. So eventually, I dared to call AKG Audio and Biodynamic and Sennheiser, their support staff, basically, support service. And I was pretending to owning their headphones and trying to get, a pair of their speakers. And they were asking me questions like, what's the model, what's the serial number? And it was like, I don't know anything, just send me something. So eventually, I got to speaker drivers from the AKG that they use in the K712 model,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
orange one, their reference kind of headphone. And basically, I've learned the most about the acoustics principles by using today our competitors, I guess, speaker drivers in a homemade chassis in a garage. So the basic principles came from that, and then it just takes a lot of trial and error and years of doing that, I guess.
That's wild, man. I mean, I guess it would be, well, certainly in a garage setting when you're learning how to do it, it would be a lot to try and figure out how to actually build a driver, right? Would that be too much? Is that something that you later got into, or would headphone design still be a combination, a process of using some existing parts and creating some things custom and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the landscape would go something like this. Either you're a huge company that has basically enough skills and talent in house, as well as capital and tooling and so on, to actually build a driver, which is
Hmm.
kind of the most complex part in a headphone. Or you just outsource that to companies that do that in a large scale. So these are the only two options that you really have. So in my case, I found speaker supplier that was willing to work with me as a like super small company on small order quantities, and slightly adjust the speaker units that they were already having. Um, so that was the entry point for me because without that, it would be impossible to develop a driver, in a garage. It's just too complex, and you need to have the knowledge that I definitely didn't have back then. And even today, we're not making our own drivers. We outsource the development, which means that we set up requests, how it should be, how it should fit,
Yeah.
etc. And in
Yeah.
terms of specification and frequency response, we do all of that internally in our lab, and we send the data sheets out to different suppliers, and then we just collect quotes for those, and then we play the back and forth game a little bit until essentially we land with a supplier that is trustworthy enough that the tolerances are consistent, and then we use that driver inside our chassis. So we don't manufacture them; they are manufactured overseas, but by specifications that we've designed internally.
Yeah. So you make sure that the product is excellent, and then you find a place that can build like a high quality version of exactly what you need. So that's cool. So maybe a good question for us is what goes into a headphone? I mean, what is a headphone? What is in a headphone? What makes a headphone good or bad? What have you learned about that process, and how did that lead you to creating these headphones? Like right now, I'm wearing the X1 headphones, and they sound beautiful. Like when I listen to music in the studio, I mean, your voice sounds great coming through, but obviously, we can be more tolerant about for our Zoom calls and things like that. We're actually on Riverside right now, but the what we need in the studio for mixing music, for creating music, we need something that we can really trust, right? So maybe
Mm-hmm.
talk about that, the importance of that to you and what goes into a headphone and how that all comes together.
To not get too technical, really, I would say that what what is important to me or to us as a company is to really service or serve our clients, our users. which are mostly mixing engineers. Not all of them, but mostly mixing engineers or creators, just doing things from home. And we've actually recorded a small documentary just a month ago or so. It's published on YouTube. You can find it. It has a nice little title. It's called The Rabbit Hole of Trusting Sound. And I'm exploring with top-level engineers, Grammy-winning engineers, what does it mean to trust sound, which is what you've just mentioned. How can you trust what you're hearing? What is this all about? And it seems that there are different ideas, maybe a little bit, slightly different, but the underlying truth is that you just need to hear things the way they are. In the
Right.
good and the bad, everything kind of has to come through whatever monitoring you're using. And that eventually eliminates the back and forth between, let's call it a car check. So you don't need that anymore and other versions of, double checking. So what goes into a headphone for me and for my clients would be something that makes whatever you play back through those sound as true as possible. I know it's a philosophical question
Yeah.
or answer, but I think that's the important thing when it comes to headphones in general, rather than the technicalities, which are, of course, the base for making things happen. But are we really, gonna make decisions on headphones based on, I don't know, the transients response or
Right.
any of those? Is it
Yeah.
like 51
None of the.
millimeter or is it 49 millimeter in size? Does it matter? What matters is how they sound, how they translate. At least
Well,
that's my point of view. Yeah.
there's an expression that like nobody ever walked out of a grocery store whistling the sound of a console, and it's the same thing. Like nobody's ever walked around whistling the sound of a transient response of a pair of headphones. They're enjoying the music, and so all these things that we use like headphones are part of our tools to help us bring music to life in the studio and bring it outside to the people. And you mentioned a couple of things. One is truth in the headphones. I feel like part of that is wanting to have headphones that reveal a lot to you, because you want to know where the problems are. You want to know if there's a problem in your music. You want to know where the problems are. You also want to know when you've got something correct, when it's right. You're turning up the high frequency on something. You want to know when to stop, And so those are important things. And then the way that the music you make in the studio translates out to the rest of the world, because you want it to sound right on every system or as many systems as people listen to it on, right? And then I guess another thing which you haven't brought up yet, which I think is important about the construction of the headphones, but really it's, to your point, it's like about the philosophy of them, is they're very comfortable. They're just comfortable in my head. They're not, they're not making my ears tired, and they're not squishing my head, So
I mean, we can dive in
how
all
do you do
this.
that?
We can dive in all these little details about designing headphones if you really want to. But I would argue that the important thing when it comes to trusting sound is obviously the flat frequency response, which I already covered and touched on. But you mentioned something interesting in your statement question kind of form.
Right.
Is how do you know when you tweak a high end frequency or something, and how do you know when to stop?
Right.
So that would be the frequency response responsible for that, and a little bit harmonics as well. But the funny thing, at least for me, well, not just me, is how do you know when the compressor is starting to really kick in?
Right.
How do you know when it's compressing for 1 dB, just touching? Because usually on speakers and on headphones, that's really difficult to detect. Most engineers, when I talk to them, can you really hear a compressor just chopping off 1 dB transients. Can you hear that?
Hmm.
And usually they say, no, I see it, right? I see the gain reduction going, just want to be just touching it. So for me, it was really important when I was designing the chassis of the even previous models was, how can I get the acoustical design of a headphone to a point where it would be a lot better than any other headphone in detecting these little compression moments, little transients, little background noises. How do you do that? And it turns out that it's really important to have an acoustic chamber that is kind of similar to what you would have in a guitar cabinet. So you probably know this. Guitar cabinets or bass cabinets come in like open back form or a closed cabinet form. So the closed one is a lot more reactive. And this is what we did over here with the headphone as well. So sure, they are open back, literally, so the air can escape over here. But between the back side and the front side, which is covering your ears, there is basically like a wall. So the sound pressure being generated inside the ear pad around your ear does not have a so-called bass reflex hole or whatever venting hole to the backside of it. So for that reason, even the like super tiny small movements of the main brain can create enough sound pressure for your ears to actually pick it up. So to put it bluntly, they're just more sensitive to anything that you do with your signals when you're mixing, so you can pick up compression a lot sooner than you would with a fully open headphone, which would mean that the air or the sound from the front of the speaker will be able to escape and have a contact with the sound at the back of the speakers. So that's
That's
something
wild.
different from basically any other, um, you know, mixing headphone.
Yeah. So, what do they call it? An infinite baffle in speaker design, I think,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
So it's this idea that, and you learn about this when you kind of learn the physics of sound and speaker design, is how the bass response from the front of a speaker actually, I guess one way to describe it, kind of circles around to the back and mixes with the out of phase signal of the back of a
Mhm.
speaker,
Mhm.
and so it can actually have cancellations in certain frequencies. So that's very cool. And I mean, what an amazing thing to be able to do. It's, when we're working, particularly in home studios. I mean, a great deal of our audience are in home studios. So, how encouraging to think, wow, I can sort of solve the challenges of speakers and monitoring my studio by having a pair of headphones that I can trust and really dial things in right. Now, in your experience, Rok, do you find that it's still wise to have a combination of mixing in headphones and then checking on speakers? Have you gotten that kind of feedback from the professional engineers that you speak to?
Yeah. So I do see that the youngsters in the industry are relying on headphones a lot more.
Hmm.
I think it's just a natural course. Being a youngster today, entering the workforce of audio engineers is difficult. It's very expensive. The way the world is set up at the moment. So I understand there is a need for using headphones, and because of that need, of course, the skill set of using headphones is also more advanced with these folks than it is maybe with others, for sure. But basically, I would say that true audio engineers, the ones that have enough experience, will still use both.
Yeah.
And I think that's the correct way to do things. You need to check back and forth because the sound stage is quite different between headphones and speakers. Even though you can use a lot of so-called can openers or crossfeeds or
Hmm.
emulations of rooms, etc., which, by the way, do come with the X1 as well, if you want to go down this road. But it's still different. The experience when you have speakers in a room, when you interact with the room, meaning moving around the room while you're listening to a mix, will
Right.
reveal things which headphones will maybe not. But at the same time, the level of detail that a headphone can provide is something that you would need to spend crazy amount of money to get to that level of detail in a speaker-based setup. So the only correct answer, in my personal opinion, would be to still have both and just go back and forth between those. And trust headphones always, because you will move to different rooms, you will move to different studios. You might get, you have to guest mix somewhere, or you will mix from the airport, which happens a lot. I've been told by engineers that the timings are insane. You get a job literally at night, and in the morning you gotta send out the mix or the master wherever you are, which of course again forces the industry leaders as well to rely on headphones more than they did in the past.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a combination of both. But going forward, I think headphones will be more and more dominant, as mentioned before, because of the youngsters, as well as because of the consumer, which we all know how music is consumed today, and it's headphones all the way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a no-brainer. Like, if you can get something to sound great, and well, and this has been my experience too. Is every time I can get something to sound really great on high quality headphones, high high quality monitors in the studio, it ends up sounding really great in on anything else, you know.
Mm.
And if it and the opposite is true. If it doesn't sound so great in the great headphones and the great monitors, it'll sound okay everywhere else, but it doesn't sound as great as it could be. So there's
Mm.
definitely a lot to be said for keeping the quality of something high while you're creating it, so that it translates and delivers to the experience, of listening to it later.
There's a cool philosophical question that I've been, throwing around for fun. Um, do you think you can make a decision in terms of which headphones or which monitoring system you would choose or you would trust by using finished produced music to make that decision, or by using raw mixes with mistakes in it? What would be your take on it?
Oh, very interesting. I use a combination of those things because finished records are often, finished masters. I mean, they are finished masters as well. So
Mm.
sometimes that can be a challenge to compare a stage in the mix to a finished master, because it's going to need another stage, maybe, of mastering. But I also put mastering loudness plugins on my mix to try and make sure it's in that ballpark.
Mm.
So I think there's a lot of value in comparing to something that's really finished and done very well, because it inspires me to really push the limits of what I'm doing. As far as mistakes and things, I think that could be good too, because if you can identify those mistakes, if you know that this particular mix had bad bass in it, like the bass was
Mm.
wrong, and then you listen to it, you can teach yourself in listening in the headphones, that's what that sounds like. So when I hear that sound, I know that I'm in the
Mm.
wrong place.
Mm.
And so
So
having headphones that will reveal all that is going to give you the ability to actually teach yourself how to get the right result.
exactly. So the spin on this question is uh, basically, if you're using polished masters by the greatest engineers that there are, their job is to make sure that whatever you're listening to on whatever device you're listening to sounds really, really good. So how on earth can you make a decision if the headphones that you're trying to purchase are any good for mixing if you're actually listening to signals that are made to sound good on anything? So it defines the point of just what are you testing for over here?
Right.
So that's why I'm throwing this question around, because I think it's really interesting that I do the same mistake, like anyone else. I get a pair of, competitors' products, and I just go and, listen to music and try to enjoy and what's the difference in colors and so on. It's all great, but we are in the business of making records, mixing records, making sure that things translate. So we are a lot earlier in the stage of a, in the life cycle of a song.
Yeah.
So making or buying gear, whatever that is, including headphones, of course, you should be able to test and hear the mistakes in a mix and know if they will translate. Because the funny thing is, as you mentioned bass before, if you have a mix that has a wrong bass, but you're using a headphone that is colored in the opposite direction as the bass is, so you'll be actually hearing a fixed bass, without even knowing it. So here's my point. Whenever you're trying to buy whatever gear for making mixing decisions, you should always test it with the actual mixes that with all the mistakes that are there, early in the stage, rather than any masters. That's just my personal take.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. And then other things that I think can be really helpful when testing headphones or speakers. So, for example, when I was going to get my monitors upgraded in the studio, I went to another studio and I brought a mix with me. And I wanted to experience things that are hard to experience in systems that don't reveal it. So, for example, taking the low cut filter on a bass guitar and sweeping it up slowly and hearing what happens, things like that. It's like what you said, Rok, where you were talking about being able to set your compression level and hear when you've got 1 dB of compression. That's gold, that's the kind of stuff you want to be able to do when you're engineering, because you're trying to make moves. You're trying to create something, and you're trying to adjust the colors. If you're a painter, you're trying to adjust the color blue and adjust the color yellow and whatever else, And if you can't see it when you do it, how can you make the adjustments? You want to be able to hear that. And so I think that's a really great example. I think sometimes I've just taken my phone when I'm in the car and I pull out a tone generator app, and I'll just sweep a tone up through the car system to hear oh, wow, that's what those frequencies all sound like. So I think maybe even sweeping tones or sounds like that through headphones could be very revealing. But it's to your point too, it's a big difference between when it's something that you're doing versus something that you didn't do that you're just listening to.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Now, there's other things that come to mind as far as questions for me. So you mentioned you use the word tolerances in components and things like that, and putting things together. And going to the OLLO website, I've seen that I actually haven't finished installing it yet, so I'm very excited to install it for the X1. But you have the USC2 plugin that can accompany the headphones. Maybe tell us what that does and what the purpose of having that as part of your toolkit is.
Yeah, sure. So USC would stand for unit-specific calibration, which means every unit is individually tested, measured, and there's a small AI tool. Let's not throw AI too much around, but it's a small tool that does some magic on its own and brings a calibration file for your specific unit. And that file is open data, which means it's just an XML structured file. You can open it with a text editor. So you can actually see the calibration values for your unit, and you can use them on any signal chain. If there is an EQ available, you can EQ it and calibrate your monitoring wherever you are. So there's no need to, let's install some software on some computer, and then, when you move to maybe another room, there is no computer, you just have an analog out. And then you have a difference between calibrated system on one end and not calibrated on the other end. So that can be completely avoided with this kind of philosophy. But what it does is basically it brings down the tolerances of the headphones acoustically. So let me start over.
Well, it's all right.
Every
I think I
headphones,
follow you too. It's like if there's because this calibration file, I saw it. I saw it open
yeah,
up as an XML file. I was like, oh, that's so cool. I can see what frequency it's doing, what the cue point is of that EQ, and how much it's boosting or cutting it. And
yeah,
what comes to mind is the idea. It's almost like having a mastering profile for your headphones. In the same way that your mix, you send it to a mastering engineer,
yeah.
and they might do these infinitesimal moves to really, bring the song to life.
Mm,
This file sort of does that for your person. Like the ones I'm wearing came with this beautiful little box, and inside it is a card, which is black. It's like very nice black. Kind of reminds me of my car key. And then I've got a code on the back, which I won't show you. But it's got my serial number, and it's got, and then it lets me put it in and download my profile, which was measured by you guys
mm,
at OLLO.
hmm. Yeah. So what it does is quite simple, Well, it is very simple, truthfully. So the headphones are, are utilizing acoustic principles, and within that, you can shape the frequencies around, like in a room. If you have, bass traps, you'll have a different sound. If you move the speakers to a corner, they're going to sound different. If the angle between you and the speakers is different, of course, the frequency response will change. And similar principles goes for the headphone. But the materials in a headphone have a massive impact on the final result because the cavity where the sound is being developed is so tiny and so small. Um, any changes in the density of the ear pads, how much they seal, or how much they actually leak, let's call it flow resistance. All right, so how much flow resistance the ear pads will have will impact anything below 1000 hertz. So the tolerances in this material will cause the headphones to move in the frequency response, how they will respond, basically, 2 or 3 dB. Now, 3 dB, that's a lot. Imagine, making decisions on on the EQ, moving, the gain 3 dB around. That's completely changing vocals, completely changing guitar sound, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have a tool, a monitoring tool that you're trusting your decisions to, and it's already could be 3 dB away from a normal sound or a flat sound. So what we do with the software is we compensate for those tolerances that do come from the materials, because those are there in any company. It's not just OLLO. So any company anywhere making headphones, they will have roughly 3 dB tolerances all over the place.
Wow.
That's the best you can do, really. Maybe up to 2 dB. But then to get down to that, like the promised 1 dB, what we're promising, we need software to help out. And we've learned that I'm not going to bash the competitors here, but there's a company out there very famous for calibrating headphones. They are using a different method than we are. Specifically, they use a lot more nodes. So a lot more EQ values to correct stuff, and they're using quite narrow values as well. So the Q factor would be quite high, 1.5, 2.5,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So those things are, in theory okay, but in reality, what happens is that some people will really enjoy the calibration, and some will just say it sounds like crap, because we have individual ears, which you guys all know. So the HRTFs are how we hear and pick up sounds, and we have resonances that come from the concha and from our inner ear and so on. And those resonances will move accordingly to the shape of your ear. If we now calibrate the headphone, for example, at 7 kilohertz, that just illustrated, but your ear will have a resonance at 6.5, or God forbid, again at 7, all of a sudden you're fixing something that your ear would already have there. So it would sound like, like shit. So to avoid that, we're only using really wide factors, Q factors. So
Right.
1.2, 1.3, maybe occasionally 1.5. So it's always kind of like smoothened out. The reason is because we have different ears, it's impossible for the measuring device that we are using, which is like a simulator of a average human ear, right? It's impossible for that device to fit everyone.
Right.
So the closest we can get is by avoiding fixing the really narrow resonances in a headphone.
That's
Does it make
cool.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about the message that we get as engineers mixing in the studio, we often hear this expression of surgical EQ is when you go in and you go fine, you're really precise, moving things up and trying to adjust things. And then the wider tolerances, you look at Neve EQs, APIs, these classic multiband EQs, and they're called like musical EQ
Yeah.
points, and curves. They talk about boosting with a wider, gentler curve as sounding more musical to our ears, and something that's very narrow as sounding more artificial, I think. And so I think that makes perfect sense that trying to compensate for the tolerances in a headphone by using one of those two methods, either the very narrow or the more musical EQ curves, would translate as being, sounding either artificial or musical to us.
Yeah.
And these definitely sound very musical. And I've heard a variety of the headphone calibration stuff. And in fact, there's yeah, I don't know if other companies. I've never heard of headphone companies really offering too many calibration models. Some for sure, but these sound beautiful. So now, when you're talking about the USC2 plugin, that's one where we can download it from OLLO, put our calibration profile in it,
Mhm.
and then put that on our output, so that when we're listening to the headphones, we're hearing it with that profile.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the software was developed together with real phones, Sonic. So they were kind enough to allow us to work with them on this, and they allowed to take their real phones engine and software, trimmed it down, squashed it into something that was manageable for our case. And basically, when you're using the USC plugin, you're effectively running real phones. So it comes with the plugin version, so you can have like a VST or audio units or a AAX,
Hmm.
as well as a standalone, which is a great feature, especially if you try to listen something from Spotify or whatever streaming platform, and then maybe listen to something from your DAW. The calibration is the same and equal, no matter where you're playing, your music from. That helps. And also, what is great that when you're not maybe fully working on a project, you're just doing office stuff. You're listening to music, and you're also getting familiar with the monitoring
Yeah.
when you do that. So of course, it makes sense to listen a calibrated signal whenever possible. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so once you install it, you can have it on your system output, if you're on a Mac, for example, and then you'll be able to just listen to music, hearing it
Yeah.
through that calibration
Yeah,
profile, which is
actually, the,
cool.
the, the way I'm using it is without the real phones version or any other plugin, because I'm using DSP-enabled audio interfaces. So if that's possible, if you have a DSP-enabled audio interface, which means you have an EQ running on the audio interface, not even in your computer, that's the ideal scenario because you can put the calibration usually on the headphone outputs only. So you still have speakers
Yeah,
with a
cool.
different calibration and you have headphones with the calibration for the headphones. And that's, in my opinion, that's insane. And no one can offer this at the moment, at least to my knowledge, unless you do like crazy signaling chains, because the calibration data that we offer is open data. You can open it, you can take the values, put them into the EQ of your channel for your headphones. You can have multiple headphones in the studio, like 5 different, or for example, I have a studio in a colleague in Rome that has 8 of these.
Hmm.
And he's using the Monitor 8 by Motu, which offers every single channel for headphone to have a different, plugins insert in there
Wow.
by Motu. So all of a sudden, we don't. It's not like that everyone in the studio will have the same model and brand of the headphone, which is already fantastic. And it's not like they're all just sounding flat within the tolerances of the acoustics, which I mentioned before is already like 2 or 3 dB, which is again fantastic. They can get with the calibration individual unit down to 1 dB tolerance. So all those guys or gals are hearing almost exactly the same signal from those headphones, and that is so much easier to communicate in terms of do we want to go with an if preamp or are we gonna go with the SSL, because everybody's gonna hear the exact same color.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
Very
to
cool.
me that's something really cool, that just to have that in the arsenal.
Also, imagine the benefits to working remotely with somebody like you and I right now in two different parts of the world could be
Yeah.
working. Yeah, I could be streaming over a mix to you, and
With
it'd be as if we
Audioverse
were
and
in the
something.
same
Yeah.
control room. You're
Yeah.
working with a client somewhere else, and they're trying to approve a mix. And then,
Exactly.
we're not even getting into the question of binaural renderings for Atmos and immersive mixes yet.
Yeah.
Is that a path that you've been going down and exploring yourself?
We did. We've invested quite a lot of time and quite a lot of ping pong emails between us and Dolby, which will never be released publicly, but they're funny. So the thing with immersive is that it's very similar to what is flat, basically, because what is flat is debatable. We'll have different tastes and we'll have different scientific versions. So Harman would be the one that's lately being really popular and kind of accepted in the world. But back in the days, it was just a traditional diffuse field considered as flat.
Hmm.
So here enters the Dolby with the immersive sound, but Dolby before the immersive concept was using their so-called X target curve, which was
Hmm.
made for theaters. So now we have to transfer that into immersive usage and then down to headphones, which are basically fake immersive because they're just virtualizing the cues to make you think and fool your brain into believing that some sound is localized somewhere around you. So all of that is being squelched down to essentially a stereo, left and right.
Right. Right.
So how is this going to play out? I don't really know, but at the moment it's all over the place. You're going to get plenty of headphones that were designed, tuned specifically for immersive. For example, Sony with their Reality Audio 360, they have the Sony MV1, I believe. So made for immersive. But when you look at the tuning of it, it just makes absolutely no sense in my personal opinion. So if you compare that response with our headphones, the S5X that were made, tuned specifically for mixing in immersive formats, it's completely different. So relying on science or on common ground or understanding in the audio engineering about what is proper immersive monitoring, talking about headphones here, is just not existent. So we have to come up with our own solutions. And what we did is we took a Dolby Atmos room, recently certified room, so we know it was like really good.
Hmm.
On the certificate, at least, it was 1 dB away from their target, which I believe it was fairly close. And we captured that room with the ear simulator. So once the ear simulator picked up the cues, the sources from all the speakers in the room, we knew exactly how this piece of device, this ear simulator, exactly how it hears. It doesn't matter what it plotted out, that's irrelevant. We just knew that whatever it captured is what the room is like. So
Mhm.
if we now replace the room with the headphones on those same ears, on the same device, whatever comes out of those headphones, if it matches what it heard before, essentially we will have the same frequency response at the eardrum as in that, that room. So that was the philosophical kind of approach to trying to squash down the Dolby Atmos mixing kind of room environment into a headphone binauralized version. And we did that pretty well, especially because we went forward with A/B testing with human subjects. So humans, of course, hear differently. And we've learned that the target from the room cannot be fully applied to a headphone scenario because we just perceive things differently. We
Mhm.
are not able to move our heads around and so on.
Right, right.
And because of that, uh, we've learned that it helps to have a little bit more high-end presence in the monitoring when you're, making mixes in a down-mixed binaural version of Dolby or Sony or whatever. And that's what you will find in the Real Phones software, the USC that we've talked about before. It has all three target curves available. So you can choose to mix stereo in a perfect flat. Then you can choose to mix stereo or whatever in with the Harman target, which is a little bit more bass and room tilted and so on. A lot of people will use that, and other companies will calibrate towards that as well. Or you can use the spatial audio target, which is what I've just explained, so a little bit more high end in comparison to the traditional flat.
That's wild.
That's
So,
just
you know,
sorry.
I we've begun talking about this on my podcast too. The challenge of setting up an actual immersive speaker environment for mixing music, whereas most of us, it's a lot more accessible since Atmos is, for example, showing up as an option within things like
Mhm.
Apple Logic. We can get it in Pro Tools. I think it's in Studio One already, and I
Yeah.
think it's already in like Mixbus 32. So it's
Mm.
showing up everywhere. Um, Yet, if we can find clever ways to do some of that mixing in headphones, for example, perhaps doing an Atmos mix ourselves in headphones that we can trust that are designed to emulate that environment. And then once we've got a mix ready, then we just go maybe find maybe there's an Atmos room somewhere where we can go check our mix or something like that
Mm.
if we even need to. I've already been speaking to people
That's
who are like, yeah, I'm just going ahead and mixing it in headphones because
yeah.
it's working.
It's working in anyway. It's gonna be listened to through headphones.
Right.
There's like zero consumers that are gonna build Dolby Atmos rooms. So yeah, there is a little niche which would be like sound designers, or creators of audio for movies and stuff,
Hmm.
where we know it will be played back in a fully blown theater. Of course, you need a proper room to do that right. But in terms of just music, um, it's mainly gonna be listened through headphones. So whatever you're mixing, I think you should mix on headphones first when it comes to immersive mixing for music.
That's cool. It's a cool concept. Yeah, and I mean, I'm actually just getting back one of my first as a producer now for a client I'm working with. We're doing a rock song, and we're just getting back mixes now that are both in stereo and Atmos.
Hmm.
And the Atmos mixes sound great. They just sound great in headphones. They sound great, and so it's really fun to discover what that's all about and
Hmm.
begin to really understand it. Um, so that's cool. Now, there's also you also mentioned room emulation. So there's the calibration feature with USC2, but there's also an ability to mimic a space with speakers in it, right? Isn't there even the ability for me to hear my mix inside my Tesla Model 3 or something like that, but in a pair of headphones? Or am I making
Yeah.
that up?
No, it's not a Tesla. It's just I don't really know which brand it is. It's just like a car simulation.
Okay.
It's taken from the real phones. So the rooms are from real phones software. So we didn't develop those.
Okay.
We were invited to elaborate on which rooms we would think sounds great. We tested that with our ambassadors, collected the response, and then we just said, hey, this room and this room are great, this car, this club, etc. And then we made like little minor tweaks to make sure that it kind of suits what we need. And we've put that into the software. So the real phone software that is driving that comes as a full edition as well. So you can upgrade, and I believe that Disonic will offer some discounts if you're upgrading from our software to their full-blown version, which will then offer, I don't know, like 30 rooms and different speakers placements, custom HRTFs, a lot more adjustments that you can do to your monitoring chain with the full edition. By the way, you can actually use the XPS file, so the calibration file, with Waves NX rooms as well. So if
Okay.
you're running Waves NX, and if you have maybe even the Bluetooth head tracker, you can do the head tracker and in my case, or my recommendation would be the Abbey Road or the CLA room emulation. So one of those two, together with the Bluetooth tracker and together with our calibration, which you do need to input in there with a small line of code. That's like a really, really good setup as well, or alternative to real phones, if you don't like the real phones kind of style, I guess.
That's cool. That's cool. So the Bluetooth tracker, my understanding is that integrates with the Waves NX plugin,
Yeah.
where in the same way that my AirPod Pros can tell if my head's turning and doing this, the Bluetooth tracker does that. Is that what it does? So if you turn your room, it feels like you're in the room with the
It does
speakers.
two things. There are probably very few people that read manuals, and I don't either, but I did for this one. So the Bluetooth tracker is a funny little device. Uh, it's capable of more than just rotation of the head, sideways, up and down, which is usually what you know AirPods would do, or other devices. In combination with the camera, it's possible to detect the lateral movement as well.
Oh, the
So
distance.
the
Oh,
distance. So you can actually move with your chair, which is what you would do normally.
yeah.
Sit back in a chair, and the speakers will move away slightly, and that is important because how do you know what sounds good or right is by going in and out of the sweet spot in a
Yeah.
room. You're going in, you're listening, then you move out. You need that information of going between those. And to emulate that on headphones, of course, it's impossible because they travel with you.
Right.
But with the head tracker by Waves and their software and the camera, okay, it's a little bit complex. So you need to have a camera running, you need to have a Bluetooth running, and run their NX version. You're able to really hear, the full 3D image, all the reflections, and you can move forward into the speakers and outwards, and or even sideways. So that's something that really brings this immersiveness a lot closer to the truth.
That's so cool. And I'd never considered that too. So it's really cool to be learning something brand new on this video with you here now. So another question I have is, where does the name OLLO come from?
Oh, that would be my kids. They're responsible for everything anyway. So OL would be Oliver, and LO, Laura. So I had twins, the first two boys,
Wow.
when I decided to do this experiment with, creating headphones in my dad's garage. So yeah, that's OLO.
I mean, headphones are like twins right here anyway. You got one on either side, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then let's see. Other stuff I wanted to mention was it comes, these X1s come in a beautiful case. So you can take them to the studio with you. Let's see, you've got a little zipper pouch here. So at the moment, I'm using the small 1/8 inch connector, and I just took off the adapter and put it right in here. and then it's like, beautiful, like velvet lined interior. And then the cables, well, the headphones themselves. So, as a studio guy, I know what it means to have headphones in the studio, and particularly the headphones that get used by the musicians. They get they get a lot of abuse. They get beat up over
Right.
time. Things break, and you find yourself thinking like, do I have to buy a new pair of headphones because this one side is cutting out or something? But I think you've designed these where it's a lot more possible to switch out components and do repairs, which maybe you won't need to, but at some point, if you do, you don't have to
Mm,
start all over again, right?
mm. Yeah, it's well, I'm proud in a way to say that the serviceability was there from the get-go, from day one. All the designs were always considering the serviceability and durability of all our products, way before the European Union said it's mandatory. So for the past few years in the EU, we have a law saying that manufacturers must provide serviceability of basically anything that is possible to make serviceable for at least 10 years. So
Wow.
we are now seeing other headphone manufacturers from Europe also doing what we did, 5 years earlier, listing all the little bits and pieces of their headphones because they have to by law for 10 years.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
good. That probably keeps the dumps from filling up with old, products too, as people just
it
throw it
sure
away and buy a
helps,
new
and
one.
it's good for the environment, but it's also good for the consumer. I mean, you wouldn't. The important part is if you're buying something for $50 or $100, of course it's gonna break over time, and you're gonna replace it. You're not gonna even think about it. But when you buy a proper audio gear, and these headphones are proper audio gear, it's not like a headphone that you're gonna get from Walmart or whatever. So you buy this to have, and you buy it to enjoy it, and you buy it because you trust it, you learn it, which means they absolutely need to be serviceable so that you can use them, basically forever, at least in theory. So that's our goal here, and I do see that other companies are doing that more and more, and I'm glad. I'm glad they do.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that's cool about these headphones too is when you put them on, you can tell which way right away is left and right because the headphone cables actually come out at a little bit of an angle towards the front. So I
Mm-hmm.
always know that the cables are angling towards the front. So I put them on like this, and they're very comfortable. And then the cables also just pop right out; they disconnect. So you can actually take these apart, wrap up the cable, and put the headphones in the case. I was able to put the headphones in the case with the cable still connected. You just put it in and have the cable run a little different way around the headphone in the case.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty cool. And then that means that the cables are replaceable too. If because cables are something that like, the first thing you do in the studio is you go and you accidentally step on the cable and it goes
Exactly.
on your headphone.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah. 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 I mean, they should disconnect if you would pull them really hard. So yeah, that's a part of the design for sure. But it also gives the opportunity to anyone, who would love to explore different cables, different materials, and stuff like that. You can make your own cable for these headphones, which I think again is a plus for many audio engineers.
Yeah, well, certainly in the studio, once we get handy with the soldering iron and we're building mic
Yeah.
cables and things, there are times where you're like, I just need a custom cable that's this long,
Mm,
that looks like this or whatever, so that I can easily make it work in my space. And then if you go on the other end and you're talking to the audiophile people,
mm,
now you've got like like, oh, this special like deoxygenated silver cable just sounds
mm.
better than this other one, and so that probably gives them a chance to use
Yeah.
custom cables as well.
Yeah. It's just utility reasons, basically. Yeah.
Um, and then how do we know which cable is left and right on these guys?
It says it's a little marking on it. It will say left and right. So that way, you know what is left and what is right. Although in the future, I believe the next batch of cables will have a red and black termination.
That's
So it's
good.
going to
Yeah, I
be a
like the
little
red and black. I think my S4X headphones have maybe a red and
mm,
black
yeah, they did.
cable, so it's just really easy to see. Because a
Mm,
lot of times in our studios, it's dark in there, you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
And as somebody like me gets older, it's like, where's my
Mm,
reading glasses? Where's the
yeah.
zoom feature on my iPhone? So that's
Well,
cool.
with the S4X that you just mentioned,
Yeah.
extremely popular. We've sold like close to 15,000 of those before we launched the X1. Those are actually symmetrical. The speaker driver inside the headphone is in the center, which means it doesn't matter how you wear them. Back, you know, left and right is irrelevant. But with the S5X and now with the X1, it is important because we have designed the acoustical chamber to fit only the left ear or only the right ear. So if you flip those around, you will have a different frequency response. And by the way, there's a
Oh,
video on
interesting.
YouTube about that. Yeah.
Okay. Here, let me see. I'll do a little bit of a screen share to show what we've got here too. See if this will work. Oops, that's the wrong button. Let me try that one. Okay. Hopefully you guys can all see that. There's the X1 looking all mysterious and
Yeah.
like it's in a movie, which is cool. And you know, this is the OLLO website. So Rockstars, if you want to go check these out, you can see a whole bunch of testimonials from different users, different pros talking about their experience using them. Here, even backstage, they're talking about it for live stuff. Yeah, there's Mark Arcelli right there, who
Mm.
originally connected us, which thank you, Mark. So you can see testimonials from a lot of users. And then we've also got if we want to go see all the various headphones, you know, that's the X1s. Here's the S4X or the S4 and the S5X headphones.
Yeah.
Now, the cool thing about your headphones too, especially when we talk about home studios, Rock, is, you know, in the headphone world, kind of like microphones, it runs the gamut from cheap options, which, you know, cheap, if that's what somebody's looking for, then you just get the cheap option of something. And
Mm.
then, but sometimes, you know, you think I want to get a high end version of something quality, and the price really leaps up really high.
Mm.
But
Mm.
the OLLO headphones are way more in the affordable range for home studios. They're way more accessible as far as price points go. Do you want to talk about that at all? Is that part of your goal, is to make them very accessible for people to use in home studios?
Yeah, accessible. Sure, I'm more inclined to use the word reasonable pricing,
Yeah.
which kind of resonates a little bit better with me. So the way we've been rolling this, you know, company and brand and products and so on, is really trying to deliver true value, great support, and keep that for the future. So what that means is that when you buy something from us, it's not going to be discounted the next month.
Right.
And it's almost impossible to buy anything from us with a discount unless you enroll in a student program or in the endorsement program. So these are basically the only two ways to get a discount from us. And I believe that that's the only fair way to go, not just for us, but for the audio industry in general. Because what hurts me directly or indirectly, well, we hurt each other basically in the music industry by doing discounts that makes absolutely no sense, especially on Black Friday. You have mixing sessions, you know, 70% off. Like, how is that a part of, you know, a good mentality? It's just not. It's destroying the industry. It just begs the question: are you like really less valuable on that day than you were a day before, and you will be a day after? You know, it begs the question: why do those discounts really exist? And I think that we need to be fair to each other. So when anybody is performing or doing the mixing jobs or whatever there is, we need to respect each other and pay a fair price for each other's work. But that also means pay a fair price for the products that audio engineers are creating for audio engineers. So in this regard, yeah, reasonable pricing is what comes to mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are $500, and I think it's more than reasonable for the value that they bring. They have 5-year warranty, which is also insane in its own category. And then with the calibration and with the software, these are not made in China. These are made in Europe, in Slovenia, hand built over here. So it's more than a reasonable price that you are asking for, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reminder to us is there are some things we buy for our studio where what we need is one, to begin with, we just need, a high quality version, reliable version of something. So monitors, we don't necessarily need to have many studio monitors if we can have, a pair of great studio monitors. Same things with headphones for mixing in the control room. We don't necessarily need to have many. We just need to have the ones that are going to work for our situation and what we're doing. In this case, it sounds like the S5X might be a pair that we would want as well to do immersive mixing in. As opposed to thinking about headphones when we've got headphones out on the floor for the musicians, that's a different experience. In some cases, there are many times when you might want to give an open back headphone to a singer because it helps them sing more naturally and hear themselves
Yeah.
naturally in the space and not have to do, the ear off in the same way.
Yeah.
So that can be a benefit sometimes. Of course, when there's a microphone nearby, if it's an open back headphone, you have to be considerate of how loud the headphones are turned up because then you might hear that bleeding back into the mic and stuff like that. But those are all just things to experiment with in the studio. But in the mixing situation, in mastering, having that reliable set of headphones where you can trust that what you're doing is leaving your studio and sounding great is just awesome.
Yeah.
OLLO is a wonderful company. Let the rock stars know, Rok, where should they go to learn more about you, find out more about you, and if they want to purchase a pair of headphones, or if they just want to go hear a demo somewhere and listen to them first or something like that. What should they know about that?
So if you're talking about the US, we are available through Amazon, but as well as through Vintage King dealership network.
Okay,
So
great.
there's a way to get demos as well, I'm sure. But you can also buy directly from us, and we do have 90 days trial period. So there you go. You can demo them yourself, and if you don't like them, just send them back.
Wow, that's amazing, man. What a generous thing to do for everybody so that they can really find out. Because, I mean, sometimes we just don't know. We're like, well, it's great to hear
You
about
can't
something,
know.
but I don't know what it sounds like till I hear it.
It's impossible. That's a big question. How do you buy any audio gear on a distance online? Including guitars. You've played maybe you have a guitar behind you over there on the left, and you can probably order the same model, but you really don't know how well it sounds until you play it. And I've went through this process with Fender Precision basses. So you order 2 basses from an online store. One sounds good, the other doesn't. So you ship one back, although they are the same model, same brand, same thing. It just happens, and it's the same with microphones. We are back to the tolerances debate. It's just
Yeah.
materials that it's impossible to make every single unit exactly the same. And when it comes to audio, in audio, the nuances, the little things are everything to us. They make all the difference. So it's really the only way to know, to get it, listen to it, and make a decision then.
Very cool. Well, I have one more question that I thought of that I want to ask you
Yeah.
before we sign off. You mentioned the room emulations, and I think you said one of them was a club.
Mhm.
And so that brings to mind the question of mixing and creating music in OLLO headphones. Are there is it really best for certain styles of music, or does it work for all styles of music? And if somebody's making music that is like EDM or bass music or hip hop or any of those things, what comments can you say about you know knowing what your bass is doing in headphones? Mention that.
So, um, I'll I'll be very brief on this. In terms of the bass, you can always turn it up if you need that, if you have a lack of that, and also with the Harman target, which will give you like 4 or 5 dB boost below 100. It will definitely turn these headphones into a very traditional EDM kind of headphones.
And
So
that would all happen within the USC plugin, for example,
yeah,
or
yeah,
okay,
yeah. That will happen within the plugin. But the funny thing about this, monitoring bass heavy stuff is, are you really trying to just fix the bass, or do you care about the relationship between the bass, the low mids, the mids and highs, so the full spectrum? Because the way our ears, not just ears, the way physics work, if you have a frequency at 40 hertz, 41 for example would be the E string, right? So if you have something at 40, 41, and then a signal at 82, that would be an octave, right?
hmm
So if you have a frequency response, and then another octave would be already at 160. So that is the territory where headphones will all of a sudden be all over the place. So for
right.
example, the DT7070s, really popular, fantastic headphones.
I've used them for years and years.
Everybody did. They are fantastic headphones, really. But they have like a scoop at around 200 and something hertz. And it's not really little. It's not like 2 dB. It's not like 3. It's like massive. So what happens is that when you're listening or making a decision in terms of how much bass would you have, like a bass guitar, or maybe even selecting the kick drum, um, which one are you going to put into your EDM song? The relationship between those 80 hertz and then those 160, and then again, when it goes to 320,
hmm
um, you know, those octaves, if they are more than 3 dB away, physically you're going to have the so-called masking effect of the frequencies kicking in. So you're physically not able to hear a frequency because of that reason. So how are you going to mix it? Of course you can't. So the question goes, do you really want to have headphones that boost the low end a little bit so it's more like enjoyable for you, but you're likely sacrificing some information in the low mids by using those? So in my personal opinion, it would be a lot wiser to use headphones that may not be so entertaining in the low end, but will reveal the relationship between the lows, so the 40, 80 hertz, for example, or 1500, towards the low mids. Because what happens in a club or in a car or in a coffee shop is usually the 150 to 300 or 400 hertz will get somehow boosted and will
hmm
sound muddy and so on. So if you can avoid making bad decisions early on, that's the best possible way to go. But yeah, it might not be as enjoyable as a traditional, EDM ready headphone.
Well, I suppose you can just enable or disable in the same way that you go to the
Yeah.
car. You might not make a change in the car, but you would listen to it there. You could
Mm.
just turn on things and kind of see what the experience is, maybe. So that's
Yeah.
cool. And then that did bring to mind the question of listening level. So if you're using speakers in the studio, you learn things like having an SPL meter, maybe where maybe 85 dB SPL.
Mhm.
I forgot if it's A weighted or C weighted, but that might be considered a sweet spot in the Fletcher-Munson curve. Do you have
Yeah.
any tips for us in mixing in OLLO headphones about loud, normal, so like quiet listening, normal listening, and loud listening, and
Yeah.
how to judge what those things are?
Um, there's a scientific way of doing that, because we do have the data for the headphones, which is called sensitivity of the headphones. So we know exactly how loud they can get at certain power of the amplifier. So you can do some math and get to whatever dB volume you want to have in your headphone. But it's not really easy to understand. Well, many people will not. So the way I would say is the easiest way, and I've been taught that, or it was brought to my attention by an engineer called Tokyo. He's the engineer for the Walk of the Earth band, a really cool Canadian band. And he said that he's just using his phone as the SPL meter in the room. So whenever it says like 85, that's 85. And then he does A/B comparison between headphones and speakers. And that for him is close enough to know where he is to start making mixing decisions. Yeah,
That's clever. So then you can find your normal or your 85 level, and then just find it, match it for a quiet, match it for a loud. And then I guess it's just a question of, you put little marks on your volume knob, whatever your headphone amp is.
Yeah. And if you don't have this option, then of course you can always calculate it from the sensitivity data.
Awesome. Well, Rok, thank you so much for being here with us at Recording Studio Rockstars. What a pleasure to hang out with you. So cool to meet you, and really fun to hear you talk about all this, deep thought that goes into making your headphones so that we have a great experience in the studio. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's just the tip of the iceberg. It goes a lot deeper than these debates. But yeah, I would encourage anyone, if you're ever close to Venice, you can stop by OLLO. We are an hour drive away from Venice, Italy. So you can, join the pleasure and business in a way, and, visit us here in the factory.
Okay, cool. I think I was saying OLLO, but you sort of pronounce it as OLLO. Is that how?
Yeah, just
OLLO.
OLLO.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, sounds awesome to me. And then Rockstars, please remember to just go to OLLOaudio.com to the website. You can check out all the different models there, learn more about it. And as Rok said, if you're here in the U.S., you can just go on Amazon. Now, if somebody goes to Amazon to purchase the headphones, does that still give access to the 90-day trial period if they needed it?
It's whatever the Amazon has. I believe it's 30 days there. So
Right.
If,
Okay. Of
if
course.
you want to have 90 days, you would need to buy from us directly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And Rockstars, my prediction is you're not going to be sending them back, so don't worry about it. Rok, thanks so much for joining us. Were there any questions I forgot to ask you?
No, not really. I mean, it was a very lovely debate, and I do see why you have a following that you do have, because you have really nice, thoughtful questions, and you're very experienced in this. So yeah, thank you for inviting me. Actually,
you're welcome, man. I just have a love for this stuff, and it's all I want to do for the rest of my life. So, and I know that everybody watching this and listening to the podcast feels very similarly, which is exciting. Rockstars, please remember to subscribe to the channel here, kick that like button, let us know how you enjoyed this, and drop your questions into the comments. I will absolutely jump in there and reply to them, and I promise. I didn't ask Rok his permission beforehand, but I'm going to forward any questions that you got for him if I need him to see him, too. And awesome, dude. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Bye.
All right. See you soon. Cheers.